Excellent. We got have all our presenters here, and it's 4:45 Colombian time, 5:45 Eastern time, and somewhere almost 2 a.m. in Israel. So it's important to keep that in mind. I will be very quick. So good afternoon, buenas tardes, boa tarde, to everybody who joining us today. I'm Roberto Mora, one of the members of the steering committee for CMLCA, and I'm happy to welcome you to our last panel of the afternoon, where we have three very intriguing presentations. We'll give the floor first to Tammy Shel, broadcasting from Israel, and her session, The Impact of Media on the Conflicts of in the Middle East, a Caring Approach. Then we will listen to a video presentation for Resemblances, a cross-cultural film building event from McClanahan. And finally, we'll have a presentation from a compatriot of mine, Astrid Johana Artistizabal Cardona, and the session called EFL Preservist Teachers Challenging Media Views of Colombia's Armed Conflict, exploring the possibilities that critical peace education and pedagogy of memory can offer to ELT. So the mechanics are very simple. Once I stop talking, we'll go in that particular order. Tammy will go first immediately. After her remarks, we'll play the video from Lauren, and right after the remarks, Astrid, you can just go next without the need for cue. So with that in mind, we're going to give the floor to Tammy. Once again, appreciating her effort to staying up kind of late at night in her hometown in Israel to join us this afternoon. So Tammy, the floor is yours.
Hi, everyone. I hope no one is getting killed behind you. I can hear noises as if someone is getting killed. So what, I don't understand. Do I have like 5 minutes? Because I recorded 5 minutes. So like, do I speak right now for 5 minutes?
That is correct.
Okay. All right. So stop me when I need to be stopped. So I don't mind if you even put the recorded voice of mine, but I will try to be focused. So my presentation is actually sorry, I'm not very focused. It's about I've been thinking so many years that the ongoing conflict in Israel, the Israelis and the Palestinians, always been perceived via media in a very negative way. And if we do see some positive things, interaction, then it's being portrayed as a very, very unique thing. But in fact, regardless the asymmetrical relationship we have, because there is occupation for sure, the relationship between Israelis and Palestinians, number one, sometimes have a lot of compassion and empathy. And what I'm saying is that many times it has an impact when we see only the negative aspect, and I wonder whom it serves. Sometimes I think, mostly, and definitely it was in May when the social media was really active when we had the last conflict. So in many ways it endorsed the oppressive regimes. And when I say oppressive regimes, I'm talking about all regimes, whether it's Israeli or two Palestinians authorities, because the Palestinians are split at this point. And it doesn't actually raise the voices of the people who want to have normal life, want to have peace, want to have good relationship. And it doesn't show also the very good relationship that people have. As a result, the social media, which of course we like to condemn them all the time, and yet there were so many groups that emerged in light of the conflicts, the latest conflict in May, that were called like moderate Israelis, Palestinians, we want to have peace, and so many Zoom meetings between Israeli Jews, Israelis, Palestinians, Palestinians, Muslim. It's even hard to say Israeli-Palestinian conflict because I wish it were two entities. It would be much more simple even if it were two entities. And I think when we have to teach media, we also have to teach to see beyond the lens of media. So in many ways, I use the idea of caring, how we bridge people together. And I also use the idea of ethnophilosophy, which was part of my research. When you let people, when you teach children from a very young age to do research, to learn how do we actually do research, how do we get text, how do we get papers, to understand that it's basically being built and consolidated by people who do that. And so I think if we bring the positive aspect, sometimes it can help people to see each other in a more humane way. I'm sorry, I don't know if I'm very clear right now because I didn't expect to talk directly. So I hope I was very well focused. I apologize if I was not. Thank you.
No, thank you. No. First of all, I think all of us here can resonate with the fact that being 1 a.m., sometimes we're not necessarily in our best shape. So I think all of us can resonate with that. And once again, I think we appreciate your coming over and sticking around. I think that the central point was clear, and then we're gonna have the conversation where people will ask questions, and maybe if there's need for elaboration, then we'll do all for that. So coming next, Andrea is going to help me with the video for the presentation by Lauren McClanahan. So let's do this.
Well, hello and welcome to my presentation called Resemblances, a cross-cultural film building event. My name is Lauren McClanahan, and I'm a professor of secondary education at Western Washington University in Bellingham, Washington, USA. And I'm going to zip through this because 5 minutes goes by fast. So what in the world is film building? Well, film building is it's doing away with the traditional structures, what we might think of when we think of asking students to create short films. It's inviting films to emerge more organically, and it's allowing students to make their own decisions as opposed to having adults make the majority of those decisions for them. And of course, celebrating the voices and the visions that students already bring to a workshop. So what happened was my organization, the Bellingham Youth Media Project, partnered with an organization out of Boston called Filmbuilding.org and our Bellingham Sister Cities Association. And we invited students from our sister cities in Bellingham, Washington, Vaasa, Finland, Tateyama, Japan, and Port Stephens, Australia, to collaborate on a film around a particular theme. So the process, we had an orientation on a Saturday, Bellingham Day. This spanned days, international date lines, where we introduced the students who were involved, and these were all high school students, and we worked with the Bellingham Sister Cities organization, the adults, to find teachers to promote this to their students. These are all public school students, and we introduced them to the theme of resemblances because our sister cities, these particular sister cities, resemble one another in geography, in size. They're all coastal towns. They're all about the same size. So there are plenty of resemblances that students could find within their cities. They became at the orientation familiar with WeVideo, which was the platform that we used, setting up their WhatsApp, what they used to communicate with each other with. And then the actual workshop was through Thursday through Sunday, where we would meet for a couple hours via Zoom. It was very late at night here in Bellingham, very early in the morning in Finland. It was tricky. Students decided what kind of footage they wanted to capture for their films. They may assign roles to one another, like editor or sound engineer. And they would problem solve during the Zoom time. They had time to work in their groups. Then on Sunday, they were able to invite their friends and family to attend the premiere. And the premiere was fantastic. We had an international audience spanning multiple time zones. There was last minute editing that was a little crazy. But students and family were very, very proud as students answered questions and responded to comments. So the films themselves, I'll have a link to the films themselves on my website, because I don't think we have time to go into them here, but they are just as darling as that little dog is. So please do treat yourself and watch one of the films. We got some fabulous local and international press based on this Resemblances film building project. And upon reflection, we did decide there were some distinct challenges and celebrations. The challenges that we faced, clearly language barriers, time zone barriers, the length of the workshop. But I think no matter if it was longer or shorter, I think we would still have some of those challenges. People would think it was not long enough or too short, or and there were some technical issues that cropped up, but honestly, the kids figured those all out on their own. They really didn't need the adults to help them figure those out. The celebrations, these students made new friends, they learned about new cultures, and they learned about their own culture a little bit too, when you have to decide, what am I going to film that represents my own culture? And then they all had that pride in creating something that was uniquely theirs. We got excellent feedback. I learned that I have so much traveling to do. I learned to cherish the town where I'm from and to not give up when faced with difficult problems. All of the students said that when we offer another workshop, they would like to attend. And the implications of this were civic pride, pride in self, increased empathy, students who would normally not interacted so in such an intense and positive way. And how can we make this grow? Oh, we want to do it again nationally. Please check out the films. And
thank you, Lauren, for sharing that here. But definitely, we encourage everybody to check out the videos. And last but not least, now we're gonna go with Astrid Johana Artistizabal Cardona from Medellin, Colombia, and her presentation. So Astrid, go for it. We're all yours.
Thank you very much. Okay, hello everyone, and thank you so much for being here in this panel. What I would like to share today is based on this thesis work that I developed to obtain my degree at the Master's Program in Foreign Language Teaching and Learning, University of Antioquia. And I would like to start briefly by mentioning the sociopolitical context of this study, although I'm sure it is widely known that the Colombian government has signed a peace agreement with the guerrilla group FARC, and that this situation raises some concerns about the way education can contribute to post-conflict experiences, and more specifically in the study, how language teaching and learning being immersed in this specific sociopolitical context can contribute to peace building in Colombia. However, in contrary to all expectations, most voters said no to this peace accord in a plebiscite intending to ratify it. So the question is, how can this be understood? And does it make sense that Colombians reject a peace agreement after so many decades of suffering? Although there may be different factors that can have influenced these shocking results of the plebiscite, the media campaigns to gain or to win voters on both sides played a fundamental role in this historic decision. Because while political forces supporting the peace agreement were too confident and they presented this as the best possible choice, right-wing opponents proved to be effective with a massive media campaign characterized by an incendiary speech, distorted facts, and this purpose of arousing feelings of anger and indignation among the electorate. So in this scenario, this study attempted to answer this question, like how can the implementation of a pedagogical project based on critical media literacy and pedagogy of memory enhance foreign language student teachers' critical awareness about the views of Colombia's armed conflict promoted by mainstream media. This study drew on critical approaches to peace education and literacy, A critical perspective on peace education aims at identifying first these relations of power that create inequality. It suggests also to carefully analyze the local context of the learning process so that we can actually enhance our learners' transformative agency. It states that the school can be a site of transformation, of course, but we also need to pay attention to the social context in which the school is situated, because there are some larger structures controlling the school as well. And of course, this idea of transformative agency was important. It includes the way teachers engage our learners in actions towards peace. So since these principles of critical peace education also call on the analysis of local context and realities, I embraced a local perspective that has been promoted here in Latin America, in Colombia, which is called Pedagogy of Memory, because this perspective allows different voices to be heard. It can enhance learners' agency to avoid the repetition of the same tragedies, and it sets the need to embrace a critical view of the medium. And that is why I also relied on the principles of critical media literacy to help my learners deconstruct and reconstruct messages about peace and violence in terms of the values that they represent, in terms of whose voices are getting prominence in detriment of others who have been historically marginalized. Also in terms of these strategies used to convey the messages, the interpretations that different audiences may have, the content that they present, acknowledging, for example, that there are different war agents involved in the armed conflict, that this is not only about the good guys and bad guys, but that they all have their own motivations and face various controversies and challenges. Also in terms of the possible motivations that they may have, such as what groups of people, for example, are getting benefits from the war and who's making decisions when it comes to end the war here in Colombia. And at the end, data analysis indicated that the implementation of this pedagogical project gave participants this opportunity to develop more complex analysis of the representations of peace and violence in the conflict of our country. It widened learners' perceptions of the causes and consequences of the armed conflict, for example. And this means that they could understand this is not like a linear phenomenon like the media wants us to believe. They also started to become aware of the varied war agents, acknowledging the role of some other actors who may not exert direct violence, but might be responsible also for what was happened here, by guiding them also to realize the relevance that some disenfranchised voices need to regain here, such as those of peasants, rural teachers, indigenous communities, children, youth, and women, and by supporting also these participants to uncover the purposes of mainstream media. All in all, they acquired more elements to analyze their local context and to start judging their social reality. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and gracias, Astrid, for the presentation. I think we can focus, since we have Tammy and Astrid today, on these two particular sessions, because there are, although we're talking about two very distinct conflicts, we can see overlaps in how the media sometimes moves the narratives in what happens in Israel and the internal conflict that has long afflicted my country for so many decades. And based on that, I have an idea that I discussed with, I remember talking to Jeff about this, the idea of thinking about the relationship, the nexus between media and critical media literacy, and how that plays out in areas of conflict. And I would like that for us to start a conversation, more so than questions and answers, a conversation with the presenters, with Astrid and Tammy. So anybody who wants to have a comment, who wants to express a thought, I mean, you can use the chat for that, or you can simply raise your hand. What I'll be doing for the next few minutes is just to keep an eye on who's raising a hand, and if there are several hands raising at the same time, I'll keep a note. I'll make a note in the chat, just so you know if there is a talking line. I'll keep track of the line and just simply jump in. That's the simple rule. If you raise your hand, go for it. If you, while someone is talking, you want to raise the hand, I'll keep an eye on it and I'll make a note. And as soon as the first person finishes, just jump in. Don't wait for me to give you a signal or to go. Just jump in. I think we wanted to make this as organic as possible. I think that's what I'm trying to do with this. Once again, for the people in the audience, you are welcome to raise your questions in English or raise your questions in Spanish. We have interpretation service. We have interpreters for both languages. So those of you and folks in the crowd, if you can write your questions in the chat in English, you can write your questions in the chat in Spanish. If there is a question in the chat in Spanish, I can simply translate. I'll handle the translating the question in English I'll read the question in both languages for the entire audience. So if anybody wants to just jump in and start picking Tammy's and Astrid's brains with some questions and comments, please, this is the time to do it.
What's the name of the, I'm sorry, the second presenter about the movies?
The second presenter's name, I'll be happy to remind you, she's Lauren McClanahan.
Okay. Yeah, because when he was talking about making a film, it really reminded me the same thing that I was talking about, because when we talk about media literacy, many times we don't know how we get media, media, it's also books, it's art, it's everything, but we don't know the process. And especially when it comes to news reports, we don't really know how reporters get interviewers, how we don't have access to it as regular people. And I find it fascinating, the idea of learning how to make a movie. It's the same what I'm talking about ethnophilosophy, is learning how we actually establish a research study, write books or any research. So.
And definitely, that's also, I think that's a part of critical media literacy in a sense. Sometimes critical media literacy is also about the deconstruction of the process.
And I can add also for Astrid, because my dissertation was in Los Angeles. I forgot to mention that my advisor was Douglas Kellner, and I studied with Jeff as well. So that was ethnophilosophy, studying their idea of caring. And actually, I prepared a presentation, but I didn't have time to show it. When one of the teachers, who is Latino, it was in Northeast LA. If we have time later, I will read one of his quotes, because every time I read his quote, it's like, wow, it's like really warms my heart, because there he says that at some point he realized that he's actually poisoning his students with his own demons, because he grew up in that area and he felt that in many ways he tries to amend his life experience through his students. And all of a sudden he said, I want my students to live with hope and not jaded. So sorry, it just made me the connection between the two speakers.
All right, so we have questions right here. I can see we have questions from, well, we have in order. Andrea has two comments. Well, she has a question. She says, this is directed to Astrid. What types of, what recommendations do you have for a newcomer to critical peace education within the context of teacher education? And there's an addendum. She says, note, I'm an aspiring teacher educator and I'm passionate about critical media literacy. And I'm currently conceptualizing an idea called critical media literacy and radical love in teacher education. Would be grateful to hear your ideas. So Astrid, if you please.
Sí, yo creería que, well, I would say that for teachers, this is just a reminder of our political role. Let me just check something here. Yes, I was saying that for us as teachers, both in service and pre-service teachers, becoming or trying to work towards the construction of this from a critical perspective represents just a reminder of this political role and knowledge that we need to overcome this idea of mastering these linguistic skills, communicative and linguistic skills, because I've worked with pre-service teachers, and they tend to focus and to emphasize too much on the mastering of these communicative and linguistic skills. But when it comes to face these challenges that we have to face in public institutions, which let's say it's also one of the settings where I work, we start realizing that our social reality demands more than this. So it demands that we are responsive to what is happening in our socio-political context. And English educators in Colombia, for example, should attend this call, like trying to involve in this process by bringing this into the curriculum also, and becoming aware that the language is not only a tool or an instrument, that we are not just like clerks or people who are just working under the instructions of some other people, but that we need to consider the needs of this context where the learning of the foreign language is taking place. And for teacher education programs, it also calls on this introduction of these principles of critical peace education and pedagogy of memory as guiding principles in our curricula, in order to sensitize our students about the various social problems that our society faces. In fact, for example, in Colombia, the Ministry of Education launched this contest. This is like a public contest to hire new teachers. And let's say the context where these teachers are getting it's full of different situations of violence and displaced people. So how are our future language teachers prepared to deal with this type of situations? And I would also tell them not to feel discouraged, because some people think that discussing these topics of peace and violence in our classrooms is not the most convenient thing. And sometimes we start like trying to become neutral and not to state our political position. And this happened to me many times when I was trying to undertake this type of projects, because they used to tell me like, oh, no, please don't focus on that. You should be teaching the language and no more than that. But I felt this call. It was always there. Like, we need to do something else. What is the meaning of language, and how is language serving some other purposes apart from reproducing social realities? What are we doing with this? Yes, I don't know if I answered the question.
Let's see, we have
yes, you did. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay.
I feel the spirit of Paulo Freire in your words, and I want to thank you. I hope to reach out to you to connect again, if that would be all right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
There's a follow-up question for Astrid as well, and it says, what types of schools do the teachers teach, public or private, and does that particular context matter in terms of your work?
Yes, here in Colombia, it's very common to see this gap between the rural and the urban areas, and also between the public and private contexts. And here, the status of foreign language teachers is a high status, and we can get jobs in different places, so we can decide whether we can go to this rural area or not. We can make decisions about the place where we want to work. And normally these marginalized settings are lacking of foreign language teachers committed to the amelioration of the conditions of life of their students. So I consider that this decontextualized policies, and also the way the government is hiring foreign language teachers, is also contributing to this gap between rural areas and urban areas. And the question is about the types of schools that our teachers teach. Yes, normally they go to private institutions, And the ones that go to public institutions are people who come from some other marginalized areas because they don't have like the possibility to go, for example, to the big cities or big capital cities. So yes, the question is also about that, whether this context has any relevance or not in terms of our work. And undoubtedly it has, because in those marginalized areas is where people need teachers that, let's say, are working as these political actors, people who are committed to their context, to their students, and to make the difference.
Thank you. A couple of extra comments. A comment from Alicia. Educar es un acto político. She reminds us of Freire's idea. Jeff adds, language is always contextual. It is never neutral. And I wanted to just expand a little bit on Astrid's answer from the vantage point of a teacher educator. In my case, at a private university, so it's a little bit different, but I think all the work we do in terms of this criticality is necessary at all levels. I mean, this is a conference. Yesterday, one of my students was presenting her research on critical literacy that she does in a private school. And one of the questions was, why are you doing this with rich kids? And my answer has always been, well, we have to do criticality with them because sometimes people think that critical literacy is about empowering the disenfranchised. And yes, that's part of it. But there is another side, is how we break the cycles of entitlement that happen at the top. So what we have to work about promoting empowerment, but also disrupting entitlement. Because if you don't work on those two ends, then if I don't disrupt entitlement, without disrupting entitlement, there is no empowerment. So that's like, sometimes that's the point people miss, that you have to do the criticality work at the bottom and at the top. This is top down and bottom down. It's at the same time. And sometimes people seem to miss the point. I just wanted to kind of add up to the wonderful response from Astrid. Folks, if there are any other comments, remember, you have all the options. You have the chat, you have the microphone, and there are a lot of you. So there are a lot of questions right there. So folks, let's take advantage of the time before this conference expires, and let's throw in questions on the direction of Tammy. Let's throw questions in the direction of Astrid, because they're eager to, or if there are things that, for example, we would like for us to forward to Lauren, we can also have that conversation right here.
I can give another example with respect to the first question to Astrid, just to hit the debate here a little bit, spur it. Like when I was teaching 1 year in a middle school in a Jewish school in Los Angeles, in West LA. Anyone who knows Los Angeles, so West LA is quite of upper middle class. And it actually was a conservative school. So the idea is that the kids came there to school just to have any affinity to their Jewish heritage, but they were secular basically. And I'm not very ideal. I mean, I'm not very much into the history the way they teach it. But one of the things that I did with the kids when I had to teach a little bit Jewish history, I asked them, I used the ethnophilosophy. I asked them to interview adults in their lives that lived in 2 different cities as Jewish people, and to ask about their experience, what it was like, to live as a Jew. And then they could have presented it in the classroom, and it was fabulous, even beyond my expectation, because all of a sudden they got a different picture about usually it was a parent, about their lives, what it meant to be a Jew. It even made them feel closer to their parents because they had a very private conversation. Then we analyze it philosophically. My language is the caring language through relationship and interaction. And so that's another way to integrate philosophy or theory with practice.
Thank you, Tammy. Any other questions or any other comments? Oh, let's see, we have here now we have a comment from Jeff. So I'm gonna read the comment. Jeff shared, writes, feminist standpoint theorists assert that people in marginalized positions have more chance to see the structures of power that oppress than those benefiting from the oppression. How do we help people see blind spots that are more common in positions of power? So either Astrid or Tammy, you want to take a stab at this question? Where wants to go first?
It's just silent, and if I don't speak, I'm gonna fall asleep. So either one person will speak or I will, but that's okay.
I mean, you can take a stab at Jeff's question if you want.
No, I don't want to take the entire space here. So.
Oh, but we're fine. Go for it.
Actually, I wanted to show you, but I don't know if there is time to show you a short clip, because this is things that we need to teach in school, you know. And I totally agree with you, Jeff, that usually underprivileged, marginalized people see the power structure more than the privileged one. There is no question about it many times. It always reminds me master-slave relationship of Hegel, that the master needs actually the slaves in order to be a master. But there is a clip that we have that I can show, but maybe it will take more time, because media has to sell, and they need to sell. So usually when you talk to politicians in Israel, but it's not only in Israel, but we talk about the conflict, they say, you know, nobody wants to see us shaking hands. Journalists need to see us fight or have an argument. So I have a very short clip. I'll just maybe describe it, where, you know, in the Israeli parliament, there are also Israeli, Palestinian, Muslim and Christian member of parliament. And there is one member of that parliament, of that party, Ahmad Tibi is named, and he's been having an interview with a member of the Likud who represents the Jewish Zionist side. And at some point, the interviewer tells them that, thank you for your participation. And they keep arguing with each other and showing that they're very opponent and they don't agree with each other. And they had a very heated debate. And then they didn't see that the camera was still on. And all of a sudden you see them start laughing with each other and give me a 5 and everything. And that's really something to show to students every time, what happens off camera and not only on camera.
Thank you, Tammy. Astrid, you want to go? And
Yes, and I think different ideas come to my mind after this interesting question. But if there is something I've learned from the feminist movement, is that it is necessary not only like to let's say, do these exercises of pedagogy with people, but also to take action. And I've learned, for example, from this feminist movement, the idea of radical love also, which is something that Paulo Freire also mentioned a lot. And it's like trying to connect this idea of romantic love that has been also a synonym of oppression for women, in connecting this to the love towards our communities. To emancipation, to empowerment. Yes, the importance of power of practice and hope. And also this idea of the patriarchy as a system that is rooted here in our society. So we need like to challenge this system with everything we have, not only through education, but also with everything we do in our culture, and trying to unveil all these forms of violence that take place in our daily life, in the daily life of women, and also the violence exerted against our environment. And so it's also a matter of not only like trying to change people's mindset about like to see these blind spots that are common in positions of power, but also taking action to resist this.
Thank you so much, Astrid. Love the and I think, I mean, I'm going back into the question about even that whole idea of looking at the feminist standpoint from whoever you are, because I mean sometimes we got this crazy idea that only women should write about should read feminism, or only these kind of people should read. And I'm like, no, I need to read about feminism because I'm a guy. I need to read. I mean, I should be the first person to read about feminism because I'm a dude. And I always, I mean, as an anecdote, I teach a critical theory course in the doctoral program at the university. And I have one class that is feminism and queer theory. And of course I tell the students, let's get the cat out of the bag. What am I doing here talking about those two? I'm a cis-het white dude, cis-het white passing dude. It's exactly that. That's the reason why. I don't do that because of me. I do it because of the people I work with. We have the radical love is understanding that sometimes we don't do the practice, we do engage the praxis to help the people we work with, not necessarily as an act of self-aggrandization, but in the sense of developing real advocacy. And I think that's, and once I recognize how I benefit from oppression, it's easier to fight against it. Once I recognize, oh, so that's why people listen to me more. It's because, well, part of it is because I have something really smart to say, but more sometimes it's because I have something really smart to say, and I'm a guy. Okay. So what am I gonna do to open the floor for the smart women who don't get to talk? I think those are the big questions that these kinds of conversations need to trigger. Now, Tammy is asking a question. What do you mean by saying radical hope and radical love and hope? Anybody in the audience wants, I mean, since Tammy read the question, anybody wants to elaborate? Anybody from the crowd who wants to go and wants to jump in and say something about it? Andrew, you want to go for it?
Yeah, no, I just think Astrid, specifically what you were discussing makes me think a lot about some of Paulo Freire's later bodies of work, about how he talks to us about the importance of hope, and how when we're engaging in work that relates to social and environmental justice, we must cling to hope, and that in order to actively engage with hope, part of that is action and the enactment of love. And I really appreciate, Astrid, also what you're commenting and reminding us of what Freire tells us about praxis, that thought converged with action. So yeah, it just reminded me of that.
And there is another question here from Steph. And to extend that question, I hope if you've ever tied radical love and hope with elements of magical realism. I think I'm talking to you, Astrid, so I'm just gonna go hide in the background.
Yes, I don't know. When you mention magical realism, yes, it sounds like Gabriel Garcia Marquez, of course, and kind radical love and hope with elements of magical realism. Yes, although sometimes I feel that our ideas are more advanced than our own actions. So even if I consider that I am too feminist and I am too critical and I am like a very good teacher and I am trying to do my best to encourage my students, to involve my students in certain analysis about, for example, the representations of peace and violence in the media. Well, at the end, I may be also reproducing some violent actions or maybe some harmful comments against some other women. So this is, I don't know if this is related to magical realism, but it's something that I wanted to mention because, yeah, sometimes we judge ourselves too hard and we want to do things like perfectly. But I think this is also a process of learning for us as critical pedagogues, and it's okay to do that. I don't know what you mean by this, Steph, right?
Well, I would say that I can see the connection between radical love and magical realism in the sense that sometimes, I mean, the problem with doing the critical work is that we we see that, we mean, it kind of amplifies the negative in the world. It amplifies the dark. But as I always remind the students when we talk about this, one does not do criticality. One does not do criticality out of darkness or out of despair. One does criticality out of hope and love. And I think that's where the magical realism comes in the sense of we're trying to build a better world, even if sometimes it feels like we're failing, we're still trying. So I want to stop that because I noticed Alicia raised her hand, and I really want to honor those voices who want to join the forum. So Alicia, dale.
Solo comentar que la pregunta de Steph en relación con el realismo mágico me hizo recordar esa historia, ese relato de García Márquez, de algo va a suceder en este pueblo, ¿verdad? Instalar esa duda en un pueblo muy pequeño en el cual nunca pasaba nada, y de pronto es lo que sucede en los medios. Se pone a circular esto y finalmente la reacción de la gente hace que ante el mensaje algo va a suceder en este pueblo, haya desabastecimiento de agua, todos tomen precauciones, y realmente sucede que la gente misma termina quedándose sin recursos. Es un poco también pensar en cómo se instalan las teorías de la conspiración o cómo se instalan los discursos en los medios. Me hizo pensar en eso, me encantó la idea de la vinculación entre García Márquez y el tema. Gracias.
Gracias, Alicia. Thank you so much for that intervention. Always on point. Anyone want to respond, want to add to the conversation, to Alicia's comment, or if there are any other questions? I'm constantly monitoring the chat box. So while we do that, there was a conversation here. So Steph didn't think about magical realism, powerful genre, and question of Steph clarifying the question: is magical realism the literary genre? One, to make sure if I'm understanding. Steph says, could the cross-section be a radical imagination that we wish to instill in our students? Yes, thank you. And then Tammy's adds, it's interesting the way, still, Raul, could you please paraphrase the Spanish? Oh, you mean the, Steph, you mean the Alicia's remark. You didn't get it in the interpretation. I thought you had a translation in preface, but well, she was kind of telling, what Alicia was pointing out, she was making a reference to a story by Garcia Marquez, where there is a town where nothing ever happens, and then somebody says something is about to happen. And how something is about to happen just triggered a series of events in a place that never happens. And sometimes that, Alicia was pointing out, that's how sometimes conspiracy theories start, by someone saying, hey, something is about to happen. They don't tell you what, they don't tell you where, they don't tell you when, they don't tell you what time, they don't give you, they just say that, but that just spreads all the rumors and misinformation, and that's how misinformation begins, and that's how people feed off, that's how conspiracy theorists feed off all types of our fears, the fear that something is going to happen. That's what Alicia was explaining in that in her intervention, Steph. And you're very welcome. You're most welcome. Any other comments? We still, and we have a comment from Magda Martinez. He says, yeah, I agree with Alicia. And that is the problem, that mass media have a power over society. They teach us how to behave, what to think, how to wear. And most of teenagers are influenced by what they see on television. It could be good or bad. Then Andrea, Alicia, gracias por mencionar este ejemplo, Alicia. At UCLA, mis alumnos y yo leímos recientemente esta historia en nuestra clase de literatura comparada. So Andrea is expressing her gratitude to Alicia for mentioning the story, and that they just recently read that story in her comparative literature class at UCLA. Then Alicia responds, increíble Andrea, qué bueno, sería interesante intercambiar de literatura comparada entre esos estudiantes. So Alicia has invited Andrea to exchange literature classes, to really create to kind of go and create a truly comparative literature class between students at UCLA and her students in Argentina. So good things are happening in this session. Good stuff is happening. We still got 10 minutes. Imagine what else is going to happen in the next 10 minutes if we put our minds into it. So are there any other comments? Remember, the chat is still there. Anyone wants to jump in with a question to our two brilliant presenters in this afternoon, and Astrid and Tammy, take advantage of all the possibilities of the microphone, or the possibility of the written chat. So I'll give folks a minute to post or raise their hand and ask a question. If not, then I do have one final question for Tammy and Astrid, and it kind of goes back into that initial topic I posed in this whole notion of critical media literacy, and how critical media literacy deals with these different conflict zones. And as we are trying to continue our work as an academic and advocacy community here, for example, in the work that we do, it's the Critical Literacy Conference of the Americas. Many of us are academics at universities doing work on critical literacy and critical media literacy. From your experiences, what else must we do? And I'm not saying should we do, because I think at this point, that ship already sailed. I think I want to put my money, as the saying goes, I want to put my money where my mouth is. What else must we do as academics, as educators? Yeah, I'm saying, so in the sense of in that sense of our responsibility in the work of critical media literacy, when it comes to looking at and trying to understand those conflicts, like the one in Israel.
We do a lot of things in Israel on the education level. There are so many activities with teachers, and I think the thing is that many times people get the impression via media, especially if they don't live in Israel, that there is no empathic. I'm so late at night, I can't express my words well, sorry. Caring relationship between Israelis and Palestinians, which is completely untrue. There are so many programs in education with schools and teachers, and I think the encounter, the personal encounter, number one, is so important. When people get to know each other, when they get to meet each other, they get to talk to one another. This is a way to undermine the regimes that it actually doesn't serve their own interest. And then they get to learn about one another, open up about each other's atrocities. I mean, in a very short period of time, I think it's very hard to explain how complicated the situation is, but at the same time, there is so much caring and compassion among the people, and there is so much interaction. And of course, it's easier for Palestinians, not easy, but many can enter Israel. And so this is one thing that of many things that we do in Israel and with the Palestinian authorities to increase the peace. But the problem is you always need the regimes, and when you see it in media, you see it through the regime, and then people take a stand without understanding that in many ways they endorse the regime and not the people. If we talk about women, also the voices of women, there are many activities related to women. Women Wage for Peace. There is resolution 1325, which we haven't talked about it, and it's a very important resolution of the UN. and many activities related to it. And I can talk a lot more, but I'll let Astrid answer as well.
Yes, for me, working under these perspectives has become something sometimes problematic, quotation marks, because I cannot stand in front of a group of students just to deliver anybody of knowledge and a set of grammar rules and a list of vocabulary, but I am always worried about the way we are learning together, whether what they are doing with the language and the difference we are making in the class. And but it's interesting, and I still I have this habit of asking myself about the goals of this class and the way we can organize the contents and how to make this meaningful so that we can create collective knowledge. But also at a personal level, it has, sorry. At a personal level, also, it makes me wonder about my own attitudes when I am talking about peace, and also my involvement with social organizations in my hometown. So it's like trying to continue with this commitment at all levels. And at the end, like getting these questions from the part of my students, such as, okay, teacher, but how are you going to do the final exam if we were engaged in discussions and providing opinions and reading about different topics, but how are we going to collect the grades? So I think it's also a matter of start changing our way of conceiving the learning and teaching process. And also in relation to what you were mentioning in concerning the context, I need that these perspectives also call on the need to analyze this particular context and understand what that peace means something here in Colombia, and it may mean something different in Israel. We just need to understand these particularities and act accordingly, and not like to try to look for one size fits all models, but understand that our students have their own needs and backgrounds and experiences, and they are understanding their world differently, and they also conceive the world that they would like to create differently.
Amazing. Now we do have one last question, and I think that's and it's the very last question because we're almost all done with this panel. But I really want to honor Carlos Danilo, who wrote the question. I would like to ask the presenters about their learnings from their experience, and if they would do something different, thinking about a future experience.
I would say that I would have opened up like these concepts of peace and violence, and not to limit this only to the, let's say, the topic of the armed conflict in Colombia, but also trying to open up these possibilities and to try to engage my students in these reflections about other types of violence that are harder to unveil, perhaps, and also because I consider that this may give them the possibility to let's say, position themselves as people who can challenge different actions of violence in their immediate context. For example, with my students in high school, when they listen to some violent comments against Venezuelan people or against some other students because of their race or because of their specific background. I think that's something that I would have done if I had more time. And also maybe continue working hand in hand with some other areas of knowledge, for example, social studies, because those techniques, let's say these research techniques coming from social studies can enrich the ELT field in order to analyze, for example, these representations of peace and violence in the media.
I'll try to answer quickly because time is ending. When we have one course, trust is very important in the relationship between me and my students. So if I have one course, sometimes I try to teach not about Israel. If I teach cultures, multiculturalism and gender, I try to teach it, for example, about African Americans or things that happen in other countries, just to establish a more humane discourse, to understand the conflict from a more humane aspect, as us as individuals, as collective, as human beings, and not only through the voices of the regimes. It's a challenge.
It is a challenge, and I think this session leaves us with a lot of questions and a lot of invitations to do the work we're doing. So we're gonna, I mean, again, we could keep going on for the rest of the night, but we have one final order of business to attend. First of all, to Tammy, our appreciation for staying up so late and still joining us and be engaged in the conversation. To Astrid, our gratitude for the ideas that you brought to the table today. To everybody who made comments, and the comments are still rolling, but we could go on and on and on. So I want to thank everybody for your participation, for your engagement today. For those of you who may want to stick around, in about 15 minutes, we're going to congregate in room D for the closing ceremony. So we hope to see as many of you who were part of the festivities yesterday and today for the final words as we head home and we start planning for the 2022 CMLCA. So I'll see you then in 50 minutes.
Thank you so much. And you have my email if anyone wants to contact me.
Thank you so much, Tammy.
Thank you.
Take care. Good night.